If you have not heard this story about Alex Murdaugh, you're about to hear it now because this is a crazy story. The documentary is already posted on Netflix. It's 3 episodes. Take a look at it if you get a chance after you see this segment today. Low country, South Carolina. Now, I went to college in South Carolina. I want to explain to you what that means because some people hear this and they're like, what the heck is low country? Low country, South Carolina is actually an area in South Carolina. It's divided into 4 different sections, so to speak. Low country is the area that is southeast-ish of South Carolina. It includes Charleston. It includes Beaufort, other different towns as well. And that is exactly where this tragedy took place, in low country, South Carolina. Now, I want to give you an overview of that first geographically so you understand where this all happened. Here's a map of South Carolina. I don't know why this is auto playing. Here's a map of South Carolina here. I'm going to mute it because we don't need the music. So you have 4 different regions here, and they're going to go ahead and identify them for you. So let's go ahead and play. That's the upstate. So that's actually where Spartanburg is there. Greenville is there. So if you ever been to South Carolina, or you know someone from South Carolina and you hear them say the term, oh yes, so-and-so's from upstate, they're not talking about upstate New York. Like, that threw me when I first moved to South Carolina because I just thought people were talking about upstate New York because that was the only upstate I ever knew of. And by the way, if you live in New York City, everything's upstate. It's just FYI, everything is upstate. People say upstate, but upstate, that's that region of South Carolina. And then we'll go on to the others. And then you have the Midlands. So that's where I went to college, in Richland County right here. That's where the University of South Carolina is located. So I lived in the Midlands portion of South Carolina, right in the middle of the state. It's hot. It's humid. Not a lot of breeze. And then you have Petey, South Carolina, which I don't know anything about, to be honest. I haven't really been in that area, to be honest with you. And this is low country. So when you hear people refer of low country, South Carolina, this is the area that they are speaking of. You have Charleston over here on the right. And then you have this county here called Hampton. And that is actually where this tragedy took place. Hampton, South Carolina. Low country is a little bit more old fashioned. They do have their own dish there called the low country broil. That's actually a big thing there. It's actually really good too. But it's a different place. If you leave Columbia, South Carolina, which is the capital of South Carolina, and you go to low country, it's almost, sometimes it feels like you took a step back in time because the towns are smaller. Everybody kind of knows each other. There's a lot of history there in reference to slavery. There's still plantations there in low country, South Carolina. But that's where this incident took place in reference to Alex Murdaugh. Now, I want to start with, give me one second. I want to go ahead and start with the incident that happened with Alex's son, Paul Murdaugh. So if you have not heard about this family, they are a wealthy family in Hampton County, South Carolina, in the Low Country. They come from a family of lawyers. So they pretty much have the most money in the town. Everybody knows them. They pretty much own the courthouse. They pretty much for a long time owned the judges. They were able to get away with things that other people would not be able to get away with just because they had money. Before Alex Murdaugh was arrested, his son was arrested. This whole thing is connected. So I want to mention the story about Paul Murdaugh first, who was his son. This is too big. So let's get into this. The father of the young woman killed by Alex Murdaugh's son, drunken boating crash reportedly snubbed the once powerful South Carolina legal family in court Friday before declaring justice had been served. Now, what are they referring to? Father of Paul Murdaugh, boat crash victim Mallory Beach, justice has been served. So what you have to understand is that there was an incident with Paul Murdaugh, who is the son of Alex Murdaugh, when he was just a teenager. It was him, his girlfriend, and their friends. They had been drinking. Paul Murdaugh decided this would be a good time for him to drive his boat, which was actually a bad idea. You should not drink and drive. You should not boat and drive. Even when his friends tried to tell him not to drive the boat, he persisted with driving the boat. And apparently he got violent with some of his own friends while he was on the boat. As a result, the boat crashed, and one of his friends, Mallory, was thrown off of the boat. She suffered head trauma and she drowned and died. So I have to tell you about that incident so that you understand why Alex Murdaugh was even involved to begin with. So that incident happened. So let's get into that first, and then we'll dive into more details. It says Philip Beach, whose daughter Mallory was killed when Murdaugh's son Paul crashed the boat he was driving in 2019, watched from the back of the courtroom Friday as Murdaugh was handed down 2 life sentences. We're going to get into that. When Murdaugh's brother, John Marvin, approached him to shake his hand after the hearing, he refused, replying, "I have nothing to say to you." Asked by reporters outside court how he felt about Murdaugh's life sentence verdict, Beach replied, "I am grateful. That is Mallory's father, the girl that died. Justice has been served," he said. Here is a picture of that boat. This was the boat that the teenagers were on that night that crashed into the pier, which caused the death of Mallory. Beach declined to comment on whether he believed Murdaugh should have received the death sentence. So let's go back to what happened that night in 2019. Paul was highly intoxicated and belligerent when he crashed a boat carrying 20-year-old Mallory and 5 other young folks near Paris Island, according to law enforcement. Here is a picture here of Mallory and her boyfriend. Both of them were there on the boat. And here is a picture here of Paul. Now, what you have to understand is that Paul's family apparently, and you can watch the documentary and see this as well, they were totally fine with their children drinking. They drank with their children. This is when they were in high school. They drank with their children. But apparently, according to the friends, Paul tended to have an abusive relationship with alcohol. An abusive relationship. And apparently funneling beer, binge drinking. His parents were all aware of this. So that part was not a secret. There were other times when he got into car accidents and his parents covered it up so that he wouldn't get in trouble for drinking and driving. This is what happens when you have a lot of money. The reason why I'm telling you this is because there was already an issue with the drinking. The parents did not put a stop to it. And that same behavior that he had with alcohol ended up causing Mallory her life. Let's go on. All 6 youths were thrown from the boat, but only Mallory did not make it to shore. Her body was found a week later. And I got to say something about that too. In reference to her body being found a week later. First of all, it took hours before her parents were even notified that she was missing. The Murdaugh family went to the scene of the crime before the police did. Why was that allowed? Because they have money. because they were a law family. So they had connections and they were able to cover things up. Alex Murdaugh was given 2 life terms for murders of his wife and of his son. That happened after this incident on the boat. So Alex Murdaugh, who was the father of Paul Murdaugh, later on murdered his wife and his son. Can't make this up. Can't make it up. Now, let's go on. Beach's snub came as photos of Murdaugh dressed in a Confederate military uniform at the University of South Carolina emerged on Friday. So here's a picture here of Alex Murdaugh. That's them. There's the sheriff there. Notice he's in handcuffs. Very, very sad. Very, very sad. I'm going to give you a summary of video here too, so you can see more. That's right, James. Wow, it got worse. Oh, it gets really worse. Really worse. Murdaugh was found guilty Thursday of killing his wife, Maggie, who was 52, and son, Paul, who was 22, in a bloody 2021 slaying, which the prosecution says was motivated by his greed stemming from a drug addiction and his desperation to delay getting caught for a string of financial misdeeds tied to his legal practice. We're going to get into a summary here about all this that happened because there's more to add. What you have to understand is that his son, Paul, had already been arrested once they were able to connect that Paul was the one driving the boat. Paul lied when he was questioned by police and tried to blame it on one of his friends, his friend Connor. He tried to say that Connor was driving the boat. But when the structural engineers evaluated the case, they were able to prove that there was no way that his friend Connor was driving the boat because of where Connor was positioned at the time when he was thrown from the boat. That's how they were able to connect it back to Paul. So once they made that connection, Paul was arrested. There was a hearing. And during that time was when Alex Murdaugh killed his son, Paul, and his wife. Let's get into the summary. When I say it's crazy, it's crazy.
Watching the news, you've probably seen pictures of this man. His name is Alex Murdaugh, and he was once a successful attorney in South Carolina. Alex Murdaugh was just indicted for the murder of his wife and son, Margaret Maggie Murdaugh and Paul Murdaugh. The two were found shot dead in their South Carolina home in 2021.
Let's go back.
Alex Murdaugh. Sounds wild already, right? Well, the 2 alleged murders aren't even half the story. The seemingly unsuspecting wealthy South Carolina family has been involved in more controversy than you can imagine. From the mysterious death of a housekeeper to a boating incident that left a 19-year-old college student dead, there are few things this family hasn't been accused of. So let's take it back to the beginning. The Murdaugh family has been practicing law since the early 1900s. The family served as solicitors, i.e. expert lawyers that provide legal advice for the 14th Judicial Circuit in Beaufort, South Carolina for more than 86 years. Things started to go downhill for the prestigious family after one of Alex Murdaugh's sons, Paul Murdaugh, crashed a boat, killing a 19-year-old. In February of 2019, then 19-year-old Paul Murdaugh took his family's boat out with 5 of his friends. According to investigators, the group was drinking. Hospital staff reported Paul's BAC was 0.24, 3 times.
And if you notice, if I want to show you here, just this image here, that's actually Paul at the register buying alcohol. He was underage at the time. What he did was he used his older brother's ID to buy alcohol. So there were a number of things that were happening here.
The group was drinking. Hospital staff reported Paul's BAC was 0.24, 3 times the legal limit. At around 2 a.m., 911 operators received a call regarding a boat crash. One of the 6 teens, Mallory Beach, was nowhere to be found until 8 days later when her body turned up. Now, here's where things get fishy. According to multiple witnesses who were at the hospital after the accident, Alex Murdaugh was trying to enter the hospital rooms of each friend in an attempt to speak to them. A security guard at the hospital said he heard Alex say, "She's gone, don't worry," while on the phone. 1 month after the crash, Mallory's family filed a wrongful death lawsuit. Weeks later, on what would have been Mallory's 20th birthday, Paul was arrested and charged with causing serious bodily injury and boating while drunk, resulting in death. Unsurprisingly, he pleaded not guilty. 2 months later, he was released on a $50,000 bond. Unfortunately, Mallory's family wasn't able to bring Paul to justice because he was later killed. The suspect, his own father. 2 years later, on June 7, 2021, 911 operators got a call regarding 2 people who were shot at a residence in Islandton, South Carolina. The caller, Alex Murdaugh. He was reporting that his wife and son were shot to death. At the time, cops had no suspect or motive. But Alex, he was only getting started. 3 months later, on September 4th, news broke that Alex had been shot in the head by an unknown man, but survived. According to his attorney, it happened while he was changing a tire. It was immediately considered an attempted murder, but in true Murdaugh fashion, the story took a turn. On September 15th, authorities came forward claiming that Alex tried to arrange his own death in order to give his surviving son, Buster, his $10 million life insurance policy.
Let's interject here. Let's jump in here. I know Gamer said crazy as fuck. I know this story is insane, but let's jump in here for a second in reference to the claim that he was shot in the head by someone. He paid a guy to do it, to make it look like he was shot in the head. He paid a guy to do it, but it turns out that he did it himself. Like, when I say this is crazy, this story is absolutely insane. And we haven't even heard all of it yet. Why would he do that? Well, apparently, Alex Murdaugh was stealing money from his own clients. Now, remember, he was a lawyer. He had a law firm. Goes back into his family, like, decades. So a whole generation of lawyers, the family. Like I said, they had control of the judges as well, but not this one. Not this one who was over this case. So he was stealing money from his clients. And you wonder, why would he do that if he was a part of a wealthy family and they had all this money? Well, apparently he did have an addiction issue. Apparently he was addicted to painkillers. That was another thing that was known to some of Paul's friends, that his dad did have that issue. So I don't know how in deep he was in reference to that, but he was stealing money from his own clients. And all of this just leads back to him. The death of his wife, the death of his son. That's how desperate he was. It's sad. It's crazy.
Alex allegedly employed this man, Curtis Edward Smith. According to Smith's affidavit, Alex instructed him to shoot him in the head and even gave him a gun. Alex's team tried to push out a story saying that he wasn't in his right mind due to drug addiction following the death of his wife and son, and that the failed plot was an attempt to take care of his only surviving son. 1 day later, he turned himself in. His charges included insurance fraud and falsifying a police report.
Notice when he turned himself in, the charges were insurance fraud and falsifying a police report. The false police report was when he claimed that that gentleman shot him in the head, when it turns out he actually shot himself. Obviously, the embezzlement issue there, stealing money from his own clients. So that is originally why he was booked. He was not originally booked for the death of his wife and his son. But it goes on.
We wish we could say the story ended here, but it doesn't. While Alex continued his fall from grace, officials relaunched an investigation into the death of Gloria Satterfield, the Murdaugh's housekeeper who died in 2018 due to what was reported as a trip and fall accident.
So when I tell you there's a lot here, there's a lot here. After he was booked, they started to look into other things in reference to this family and realized people just seem to die around them. Or people just seem to go missing around this family. And they came across a situation with their former housekeeper who supposedly fell down the stairs because she tripped over the dogs. You go on to find out that after she passed away, there was no coroner report because there was no autopsy done. Make it make sense. When have you heard this happening before? No autopsy done? This also goes into the issue of his insurance fraud. Wait for it. Wait for it. I know. Someone just said this is wild. Whereas I forgot who. Oh, Ryan, this is wild. It is. I know. This is the craziest story.
According to a civil lawsuit from Gloria's sons, the family hadn't received a penny from an insurance payout in connection to her death. See, after her death, Alex Murdaugh himself told her sons to sue him, the attorney he suggested they use, his college roommate and godfather of his sons, attorney Corey Fleming.
Let's go back and hear this one again. This piece is very important in reference to the housekeeper.
From Gloria's sons, the family hadn't received a penny from an insurance payout in connection to her death. See, after her death, Alex Murdaugh himself told her sons to sue him, the attorney he suggested they use, his college roommate and godfather of his sons, attorney Corey Fleming.
So Alex Murdaugh, after the housekeeper died, her family did not receive any insurance money. Nothing. After she died. And to add on top of that, like I told you, there was no autopsy of this woman. No autopsy. So he calls up a lawyer here who just happens to be his friend. Let's go back to this picture. He calls up his college roommate and godfather of his sons, attorney Corey Fleming. So he tells her family to just sue him instead because she died on his property. Oh, just don't worry about it. Just go ahead and sue me. And then, of course, he chooses the attorney that they need to work with. Let's go on.
Roommate and godfather of his sons, attorney Corey Fleming. Alex's insurance company agreed to pay the family more than $505,000. But what happened to the money? According to Gloria Satterfield's family, Alex pocketed the money himself. That led to his arrest.
There you go. Let's hear this piece again. Again, keep in mind, this family is already rich. They're already wealthy. So you got to ask, why do they need all this money?
Family more than $505,000. But what happened to the money?
So it says Alex's insurance company paid the family over $500,000. But Gloria's family, and Gloria's the housekeeper, they never got that money. They never got the money because Alex pocketed the money. Hence why he picked the attorney. Let's go on.
According to Gloria Satterfield's family, Alex pocketed the money himself. That led to his arrest on October 14th, 2021, and finally we see some justice being served. Murdaugh was charged with misappropriating insurance settlement funds and the death of Gloria Satterfield. In June 2022, investigators announced that they would exhume Satterfield's body after a coroner told officials that they found inconsistencies surrounding her death. But they didn't actually say when that would happen. We're still waiting. And oddly enough, there wasn't even an autopsy performed.
I've never heard of this before in my life. No autopsy performed. And again, you have to understand, this is a small town. Everybody knows everybody. And everybody damn sure knows who the Murdaughs are because they're the wealthiest family. Like, they own acres and acres of land. They have generations of wealth in their family. And because they have so much money, they were able to get away with murder. They got away with murdering that woman for years. For years. Let's go on.
Meanwhile, the charges against Murdaugh just kept coming. From November 2021 to June of this year, Alex Murdaugh was hit with more than 80 total charges, including financial misconduct and computer crimes. And that brings us to today. Well, sort of. That brings us to July 14th. That was the day Alex Murdaugh was indicted for the murder of his wife and son.
Now, what you have to understand about the murder of his wife and his son, he pled not guilty. He was actually the one that made the phone call to 911 to let them know that someone murdered his wife and someone murdered his son. He made that call. He claimed that he was not on the property at the time that happened. He got home and saw them there and they were already murdered. Now, here's the problem. Apparently, the weapon that was used to kill his son and his wife is a high velocity gun. I don't know as much about guns, but apparently those particular machine guns, so to speak, they can leave off a high velocity residue. And that residue got onto his shirt. And so his story did not add up. If he said that he wasn't there at the time that they were killed, he got home and saw that they were killed. How does he have the residue from the same gun that was used to kill them on his t-shirt? Thank you, Danny. High velocity equals rifle, Sabby. Thank you. I told you I don't know about guns, but isn't that crazy? Now, why am I bringing this story up? Because just the other day, he was finally sentenced. Let me make sure this is where let me check this video because this is not at the, let's see, timestamp 2:32. Okay. Let me go back because I want you to see his reaction. To the sentencing. Here we go. Here we are years later.
This is Richard Alexander Murdaugh, defendant. Indictment for murder, SC code 16-3-0010, CDR code 0116. You want me to okay. Guilty verdict. Signed by the forelady, 3/2/23. Docket number 2022-GS-15-00593, the State of South Carolina, County of Colleton, in the Court of General Sessions, the July term of 2022. The State versus Richard Alexander Murdaugh, defendant. Indictment for murder, SC code 16-3-0010, CDR code 0116, verdict guilty, signed by the forelady, date 3/2/23. Docket number 2022-GS-15-00595, the State of South Carolina, County of Colleton, Court of General Sessions, July term 2022. The State versus Richard Alexander Murdaugh, defendant. Indictment for possession of a weapon during the commission of a violent crime. SC code -16-23-0490. CDR code 0549. Verdict guilty. Signed by the foreperson of the jury. Date 3/2/23. Docket number 2022-GS-15-00594. The State of South Carolina, County of Colleton, Court of General Sessions, July term 2022. The State versus Richard Alexander Murdaugh, defendant. Indictment for possession of a weapon during the commission of a violent crime. SC code 16-23-0490. CDR code 0549. Verdict guilty. Signed by the foreperson of the jury. 3/2/23.
Thank you. Madam Forelady and members of the jury, if that is the verdict of each and every juror, please let it be known by raising your right hands. All right, thank you. Any individual polling requested? Madam Clerk, you'll need to individually poll the jury according to their juror numbers.
Number 193.
Let's go ahead and move forward a little bit here. These things are so slow sometimes. I'm like, just get to the point. Okay.
We've been here now 28 days, first few days of jury selection, and the remainder receiving testimony, an overwhelming amount of testimony, and evidence that was presented to the jury for the jury's consideration. As I indicated to the jury during the jury charge, or the charge on the law, that this was a matter solely for the jury to determine. The court found at the end of the state's case that there's sufficient evidence to find the defendant guilty if the evidence was believed by the jury. Likewise, at the end of the defense's case, when the motion was renewed, the court found that the evidence was sufficient for the jury to find the defendant guilty. The jury has now considered the evidence for a significant period of time, and the evidence of guilt is overwhelming, and I deny the motion. Mr. Murdaugh.
I'm so sorry, but it's people talk a lot slower there, you guys. We'll play this piece, and then I want to show you what the prosecutor said about Alex Murdaugh.
You now, having been found guilty of 2 counts of murder involving your wife and your son, 2 counts of possession of a weapon during the commission of a violent crime, the burden now comes upon the court to impose a sentence. Given the lateness of the hour and the victim's rights that must be taken into consideration and complied with under the Victim's Bill of Rights, and consider what I would anticipate to be a number of people who might have something to say regarding sentencing, we will defer sentencing to a later date. Of course, the minimum sentence for murder is 30 years. The maximum sentence is life imprisonment as to each count. And on the weapons charge, the sentence is up to 5 years, or 5 years, which has to be concurrent if a life sentence is imposed.
That's Alex Murdaugh.
Okay, so yes, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. Let's remember again, he pled not guilty. But I'm going to show you what the prosecutors had to say, because I think this piece is important to hear. Because of course, like, yeah, someone can say that they're not guilty or whatever, but the evidence is pretty damning. The evidence is pretty damning. Let's go ahead and pull up this clip here. Here we go.
Tonight, the once prominent South Carolina attorney Alex Murdaugh back in the courtroom yet again, unshackled to prevent bias, wearing a sports coat, spectacles, and a new head of hair since his last appearance. He faces murder charges for killing his wife Maggie and son Paul, and his attorneys want to know what evidence the prosecution will bring to trial.
The reason that we had asked for a bill of particulars is because, as Your Honor knows, that character evidence, evidence of bad acts, other criminal conduct is not admissible in a criminal trial.
The bill of particulars, a common defense tactic, according to legal analysts, to feel out where the state might be going with its case, with 1.2 million pages of government documents.
This is commonly called by defense attorneys haystacking, when the prosecution dumps terabytes of data and documents on the defense, and the defense has to look through it for that proverbial needle in the haystack.
South Carolina prosecutors, nonetheless, painting a picture of why they think Murdaugh might have done the unthinkable. The scion of a prominent family, about to be exposed, they said, for years of financial crimes.
This is an unbroken chain of constant lies and misappropriations and thefts that has been going on for so long. A hamster wheel on which this man has been on constantly, having to borrow, to earn, to steal millions of dollars.
Murdaugh was charged by a grand jury in July, more than a year after the murders occurred, and he's pleaded not guilty. But he also faces more than 80 other charges for various crimes, including forgery, drug trafficking, and money laundering.
So you see, money laundering, drug trafficking, and forgery. So it's not even just the murder of his wife and his son. It's all of these other crimes as well. You have to understand, like, this kind of thing does not happen in Low Country, South Carolina. So like this case, like, shocked and wrecked the town. So just keep that in mind.
The South Carolina man's fall from grace as a powerful attorney, disturbingly layered. There's alleged criminal behavior, opioid addiction, and mysterious deaths surrounding his family. Murdaugh's attorneys have previously admitted some financial wrongdoing and drug use.
Look, he's reconciled to the fact he's going to prison.
But today, all eyes on the upcoming murder trial.
Why this particular individual would murder his own wife and son? And the answer is because it allowed him to escape the accountability that was coming upon him that he's never had to deal with in his entire life.
And Sam Brock joins us now from Miami. Sam, one of the key points of this hearing seemed to be about Murdaugh's shirt from the day of the alleged murders. What do we know about that?
Yep. Yeah, this was an interesting conversation, Gotti. This was the first part of the hearing today where SLED, the South Carolina Law Enforcement Department, had looked at the shirt that Alec Murdaugh was wearing the night of the murders. The analyst they hired to look at it said initially there's no blood spatter on here. Then later decided, yes, there is blood spatter, but is it human blood? That seemed to be an open-ended question. So the defense wanted the communications between this analyst and the state so they could see for themselves exactly what that back and forth was. And oh, by the way, the shirt itself has been destroyed, so it can't be tested again. The judge found in favor of the defense. And Gotti, just to give you some context for this conversation and the importance of this family in South Carolina, as they're having it, we learned there's a portrait of Murdaugh's grandfather in the courtroom that has to be removed before the trial in January.
That's how prominent the family was. There was a picture of his grandfather in the courtroom where the trial was taking place. I believe he killed his son and his wife to protect himself. I really do. I really do. So it's unfortunate. Everything that happened, what happened to the housekeeper, what happened to Mallory, she was only 20 years old, young girl. Very unfortunate. But this is what happens when you have people of that status that have a lot of money. When they have a lot of money, they have a lot of resources. And this is what happens. They've been getting away with stuff like this for years. For years. Look at how the son was just able to walk into the convenience store and just use his brother's ID and get alcohol. I'm pretty sure that wasn't the first time. If Alex Murdaugh and his family members were poor, they would have been in jail. Something to think about. I'll take that comment on Rockfin, Eric. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Roger. Seeing this in South Carolina Murdaugh got that look on his face saying, I can't believe this. And I will say, black man, because you know full well he wasn't thinking black man, is casting judgment on me. That was probably more of a shock to him. Yeah, I think a big part of the reality check here for him was this is the first time he was actually going to be held accountable. The jury didn't buy it, and that judge didn't buy it. And so I think it was a big wake-up call and reality check for him. Thank you for the super chat, Roger. Murder is in their very name. Steve W. can see that, Stevie Wonder. Thank you for the super chat as well. Damn, they have a street named after them. Yeah, they pretty much owned the town. That's how wealthy they were. James M said the housekeeper died on their property. Yes. She fell down the stairs. They said that she tripped over their dogs, and that's how she fell and hit her head. It was on their property. That's right. And thank you for the super chat, Laugh 66. The defendant was showing tears and looking for sympathy repeatedly. If he was innocent, he would not have portrayed himself like this every hour. He almost seemed relieved when he could stop acting. Thank you so much for that. Very interesting. Very interesting.